Good morning and welcome to another session of Facebook Live Tuesday Tour. It's John Sautter along with April Hohleiter behind the camera from your Purdue Alumni Association, bringing you another view of campus to kindle those memories of your time back on campus. I can tell you that this has been recorded a few days before. It's being played now, December the 11th, on a Tuesday, and it's the week of finals. So finals are going on campus. So things are going to be pretty quiet this particular week. But we thought we would come to the Elliott Hall of Music, and with commencement coming up this weekend, what a perfect time to talk about this grand facility. In fact, commencement has so much to it, I think we're going to do a separate session on that even in May. But for today, we're going to talk about Elliott Hall of Music, the history of the Hall of Music, and all the variety of things that have taken place. I suspect just about every Purdue student, current and past, has a memory of being in Elliott Hall of Music, and we're going to talk about all of those. And so we're starting today actually in Hovde Hall, and you can see behind me, we're actually at the top of the steps. Engineering Mall is behind us, and for commencement, this is where the processional will come up in May as the students and the graduates are headed towards the stage. But if I take you back a few years, you actually used to be able to park in front of Hovde Hall and walk up the steps and into the Hall of Music. As the building was designed and opened in 1940, this was designed as the entryway into the Hall of Music. The architects were very intent on having what they called a grand sense of arrival. And they did that by having you come up the steps. So you were either parked or you got dropped off, came up the steps and into the Grand Hall. And we'll be going into the Grand Hall here in just a second. So this is where you would walk into the lobby and walk through towards the bridge, towards the lobby in Hovde Hall. And of course here we have Dr. Frederick Hovde in his Oxford red robe. One of our great presidents, our seventh president. He started in 1946, was here till 1971, and I always think brought us into the modern generation of a university with all the changes that were taking place during his time. To include getting involved with the Elliott Hall of Music. This was originally the executive building, was opened up in 1937 as the executive building, named much later for Dr. Hovde. But Hovde Hall, grand old building, we are technically on the first floor. They have ground floor, first, second, third. When it opened up, the third floor wasn't even finished. It was just a wide open facility. In fact, that's where Walter Schuller put about 40 draftsmen hurriedly put together to come up with the designs for Elliott Hall of Music as it was just getting started. But a lot of memories in Hovde Hall. The president's office is up the steps to the left. That was there from the beginning. Offices on either side have changed. To the left we have the office of the provost now, and on the right we have the office of engagement. These have changed somewhat over the years also. The office on the right, the Office of Engagement, used to be the Dean of Students' office. And I can tell you, when I came in the 70s, this is where Bev Stone and Barb Cook and a young Betty Nelson, she and I came at the same time, all in this office, along with Steve Akers and a lot of the other folks, Ken Coleman and the folks in this building. I made a point to come over here at least weekly to visit all the folks in the Dean of Students' office, who are now next door in Schliemann Hall. But a lot of great memories. The registrar is downstairs, and of course, originally that was Nelson Parkhurst. Betty Sudorf eventually took over there. Tom Gunderson worked in that office for a while. Admissions was downstairs. That was Charlie Henry in the good old days. Bill Murray followed him, and now they're all together in the building across the way in Schliemann Hall. So a lot of great memories from Hovde Hall. This area in the lobby then would be used as a reception area. We would have a coat room as people would check their coats and that sort of thing as they arrived for the performances. Now all the entrances downstairs actually on the lower floor into the Hall of Music. So it doesn't have quite the sense of arrival that it did. But here we are in the processional proceeding towards commencement, and the students, the graduates, are walking across the bridge that connects Hovde Hall to Elliott. And we'll talk about that connection in just a minute or so. But we're going to arrive in the Hall of Music, and I can tell you the Christmas show was this past weekend, And so they're kind of recovering from that, and so we may have a little noise and activity taking place, but you're kind of seeing what happens as they kind of convert from the Christmas show to commencement. And we'll see the goings-on that are happening more on the stage than up here. But I want to pause and stop here and talk about this building and the part that President Elliott played. Edward C. Elliott, our sixth president, had been at Purdue and recognized that we needed a large auditorium for presentations. The PMO group, the Purdue Musical Organization, was starting to grow. They had had their first Christmas show in around 1933 or so, once Al Stewart had arrived. But it was a time when the country was recovering from the Depression. Dr. Elliott found out that the federal government had about $75 million available in the PWA, the Public Works Administration. And he set about thinking about the idea of a large auditorium for then, 1940s, and in the future. And so a few stories have come out of that. One is he did, in fact, go down to the IU administration to make them aware of the money being available, and so that they could also share in some of that money. And actually, both administrations went together, made a presentation, came back and made a presentation to the state government down in Indianapolis to help split the cost. So basically, the state only paid about half the cost of the building. And as long as we're going to put a building together, make it a big building. So we had over 6,000 seats, 6,005 at the time, a few seats larger than Radio City Music Hall. But not only an auditorium, but we have administrative offices, rehearsal space for the musical groups. University bands are located here with rehearsal space. And we even have WBAA, one of the state's first radio stations to broadcast, is actually located in this facility. So a grand building was coming together. The other story that's connected to with the funding that really doesn't have much substantiation is that the bridge that we see, many people have heard the story that the auditorium had to be connected to an administrative building to kind of be called an administrative annex. So they couldn't have a competing musical auditorium with the one that the liberal arts school, Indiana University, had. And so the bridge connects it, and for many years was referred to as an annex of Hovde Hall. Well, I haven't been able to find a lot of substantiation for that, but it makes for a nice story. But we did get the funding. In fact, the funding came so quickly that President Elliott had to call Walter Scholder to get his 40 architects together to start working on designs of the building. And so it began in the 30s or so, the late 30s. And it was quite the building to observe being built. In fact, I have a picture. This is kind of a skeleton of the building. And the stories I read indicate that students, staff, and even community people came over to see this infrastructure being built, because this is when the workers would throw their hot rivets to each other and pound them in as they were still hot, that sort of thing. So it was really quite the interesting structure being built at the time. So it did open in 1940, renamed many years later for President Elliott, who was quite instrumental in getting it put together with a lot of events that were taking place here, and we'll be talking about some of those. But now we're in the lobby area of this grand design of this facility, and the architects. Now, Walter Scholder was the lead architect, but the other architects involved on a consulting basis were actually from Radio City Music Hall, a New York design firm. And there's a lot of similarity. If you've seen Radio City Music Hall and this facility, the Art Deco feel to it, very, very similar. And I have to point out, and I'll mention a few times, that the buildings were opened in 1940, and so they need to be kept up. Radio City Music Hall recently put about $70 million back into their facility to really upgrade it from a customer audience comfort perspective, also from ADA perspectives. And here we've put very little back into it. We can't get that funding that President Elliott was able to get. And so we'll point out some of those things. But let me walk you through the lobby here. One of the plaques I want to make sure I point out is Al Stewart. So here's dedicated to Al Stewart, chairman of the Victory Varieties Pop Stars Committee. So Victory Varieties, some of you are going to be very familiar with Victory Varieties, was from the 40s to the 70s or so. Al Stewart had amazing connections in Chicago and New York for bringing amazing talent out here. And so quickly, for Victory Varieties, with all the different talent that came here, Victory came from the timing of it. It was held a Friday night before a football game, and so they were expecting a victory the next day, and so the committee came up with the concept of why don't we call it Victory Varieties. But early on, they had the likes of Bob Hope and Jack Benny and Lawrence Welk and Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians. Later on, they would have Spike Jones and Red Skeleton and any number of folks. Later on, it became the Kingston Trio and Sonny and Cher, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and a lot of the other folks. I love going to alumni club meetings because everybody remembers a group they might have seen as a part of Victory Varieties on those Friday nights. Other performances too, and I think April has seen some of those, and we'll hear from her on those. But I want to move to the next display area, and this is a copy of the original version of the Purdue War Song, otherwise known as today, Hail Purdue. So this is the original composition as it would have appeared back then. Edward Rotaka, graduate of 1912, actually put that together, and it was adopted later on as Hail Purdue, as our fight song. There's the original version. Moving on down the lobby area, we come to plaques that are dedicated to the folks who ran the Elliott Hall of Music. First one was John Dittemore, class of 34, but he saw this was he actually saw it under construction and went to Al Stewart and then to President Elliott. He had some background in the area, said, I'd like to be the director, and they said, why not? And he was the director from 1940 to 1975 with all the things that had to take place within the facility. Acoustics being one of the biggest things, because for this facility, and if you've been here, you know, it's almost perfectly acoustical in terms of hearing the performers on stage, and that just doesn't happen. I can tell you with my theater minor that I had in college, that sound tends to bounce around quite a bit, and you have to be aware of the sound arriving at the same time as you see it being spoken on stage. And it really is almost a science in terms of the way they do that, and they've done that very well. John Dittemore helped make that happen. He was followed by Jack McCarthy, John P. McCarthy, Jack McCarthy, just a great guy, taking over as the director from 1949 to 1986. Just a pleasant guy to be around. He was my neighbor, and he and his wife just were delightful to be with. And then Jim Emerson, he was also Jack's assistant in terms of on the technical director side, as we started becoming much more sophisticated with lights and sound and those sorts of things. And the next plaque that will be here will be Steve Hall. Steve Hall is our current director, and he's been in that position for over 30 years. And his plaque will be up here one of these days also. A nice relief on the end of the hallway about the variety of musicians that perform here. And then here's a nice portrait in his dress uniform, Spots Emmerich. Spots Emmerich is here, the first leader of the band. We've talked about him earlier, as a matter of fact, that he actually was a student in the band, got elected to be the director, and this is one of the spiffier pictures we have of Spots Emmerich. We're now going to walk further on down the hallway. Okay, we're at the other end of the lobby now, and we have in dress uniform, Al Wright. Al Wright took over for Spots Emmerich, heading up the university bands for many, many years, retiring in 1980. And there's a nice portrait of him with the band just a little bit behind him. And again, the band has its location here. Downstairs, the rehearsal space, you know, is all within this facility. And the band has expanded significantly since Spots and Al Wright have been a part of it in terms of all the different ensembles they have now and all those sorts of things. But all part of the family here in the Elliott Hall of Music. We're now going to go down aisle 5, near the center, and you'll start to hear some things happening on stage, and that is they're striking the set, as they say in theater talk. They're actually disassembling the risers and all the things that were involved with the Christmas show. Again, this is the view as the graduates walk down, and maybe you've walked down to find your seat in this wonderful facility. Large feel that you get as you walk down, and the immense size of this whole facility is right here. We're going to arrive where we want to be at right here. Here we are at seats MM 102 and 104. And the reason I point these seats out, these are the these are the seats that R.B. Stewart and Lillian Stewart always sat in when they came to every performance. And they were strong supporters of Elliott Hall of Music. If they were in town, they would come to the performances. And they got also involved with making sure some of the performing groups could actually come here. So the Metropolitan Opera was here, the New York City Symphony came. He was a part of making sure all those came here. And many great stories have come out of those, and inspirational talks that R.B. Stewart would give about what it takes to make an opera successful and all those sorts of things. So we're going to head over here now a little bit, maybe get away from the sound just a bit, and talk about some of the performing groups that have been here. Yep, yep. Yep, yep. Okay, let's pause right here a second and look back this way, and we can get a nice view of the facility as we talk about some of the events that take place in here. And so I would start with commencement, which is the biggest one. We have 3 commencements. We have one in May, we have one in August, and now one in December. And as you may recall, and hopefully you've been through your commencement, the pomp and circumstance involved with those are just absolutely amazing. It's one of the more involved commencement ceremonies for a school our size in the country. In May, particularly with the processional coming down outside and then in, along with the fact that in May you actually receive your actual diploma. And so Purdue's proud of those things, but it all happens here within the Hall of Music. Victory Varieties we've talked a little bit about, but there's been other groups that have been here also, other performing groups that have been here outside of Victory Varieties. And so I'm thinking of Bruce Springsteen and Elton John and Lady Gaga more recently, and just a wide variety. April, have you been to some?
Smashing Pumpkins and Counting Crows.
There you go. Those are a little more recent, and all in between. And then a variety of speakers. We've had a variety of speakers from the Dalai Lama. Laura Bush and her daughters were here more recently, and just a variety of inspirational speakers, CEOs of companies and generals, and all those folks are here. And then I guess the ceremony that I remember the most is the 9/11 memorial service that was here September 13, 2001. 2 days after 9/11, they had a memorial service on campus, and it was standing room only in the facility, and several speakers spoke, and one I remember very much was Erin Taylor. Erin Slater is her married name now. Erin Taylor, a Purdue student who I happen to have known, a sophomore, was chosen to give a talk on behalf of the students, and just an absolutely inspirational talk by Erin. She and I still talk about the words she chose and how nervous she was that day, that sort of thing, you know, for that particular presentation. So a lot of great events here. We're now going to walk up through the green room. Headed up the steps into the green room. Workers are taking a break, but we're just going to be going right through. The green room is really where the performers wait just before they go on stage. And so be it a television production, whatever the production might be, there are green rooms. This is the Hall of Music green room that we're going to be going through.
It makes me wonder what controversy, horrible allegations.
So again, this is where the actors would be. These are real life workers.
He's gone through a lot of controversies.
Excuse us as we walk through. This is where the actors and performers wait till they go on stage, right here, waiting for their cue to be called. We can look down the hallway, and this is where the dressing rooms were in the good old days. And so Jack Benny and Bob Hope and all the folks would be in those dressing rooms there. Not a lot to look at today for sure, but that's why they all come on their buses these days, so they have all their creature comforts just outside the stage door there. So let's go back on stage. Thank you, everybody. Now we're actually walking out on the stage. to have a nice look back, oops, up into the grandness of this facility, making our way through all the, looks like the risers being disassembled from the Christmas show that was here. So now we're actually on the lift. This is where the orchestra would have been, but it gives you a feel, looks like from the stage, looking out at 6,000 folks. We're here on the beautiful stage, biggest stage. Actually, it's a 100-foot proscenium theater stage opening, one of the largest in the country, actually. It's 100 feet wide, 37 feet tall, and goes back about 40 or 45 feet or so. One of the larger stages of a facility like this in the entire country, and again, designed that way to accommodate large performing ensembles that come in, be it operas, orchestras, or whatever it might be. And you see the stage as it is now after a performance. You don't get to see this much after a show, but this is kind of what it looks like as they're converting the stage now for commencement, which will be coming up this coming weekend, as a matter of fact. But maybe it's a good time to pause and think about the green room that you saw and those dressing rooms, such as they are. It really caused the Hall of Music to really kind of reinvent themselves, because we have to come into the modern era, and the modern era includes really upgrading the facility itself. And so the seats, a lot of these seats, most of them are original seats from when the building was opened in 1940. They need to be wider. American bottoms have gotten a little bit wider, I've read. If they break down, we have to actually fabricate the parts for them. We need cross aisles so you can get out here a lot easier. And we need elevators. We need elevators to the balconies. And even the Hall of Music Productions themselves has reinvented themselves. They now do productions. So anytime you go to an event on campus, be it in Fowler Hall, be it in Loeb Playhouse, actually the football stadium and the Jumbotron and the video screen within Mackey Arena are all run by the Hall of Music production people. And the videos that you see prior to a basketball game where they highlight the players and all those sorts of things and talk about this is our house, that's all been done by the Hall of Music Productions. They are a very high caliber video production operation. And so if you or your business, your company or whatever are considering high level videos, they're the ones that you ought to consider doing. But it's just a great time to end to talk about the Hall of Music, where it's been and kind of where it is and really what it's going in the future. And I want to conclude by reading a statement from the 75th anniversary publication they did. They celebrated 75 years here just a couple of years ago. And in that publication they said, "In all, Elliott Hall of Music isn't just a remarkable facility. For over 75 years, it has represented Purdue's conversation about the power of creative human expression, the exchange of ideas, the triumph of virtuosity, the meaning of shared experiences, and the value of intellectual achievement. That some of the world's greatest talents and thinkers have crossed its stage, whether to make an entrance or receive a diploma, is no small tribute to the vision of the builder's namesake, President Elliott." So, great facility that has really enhanced the university's presentation within the community and the campus and the country, and we're glad to share it with you. So that concludes this Tuesday tour.